outside of salvation, the one you choose to marry is the most important decision you will ever make. And the Bible is largely silent.
When someone says, God told me you're the one, is that just Christian manipulation?
Let's talk about this real quick. Interesting people have an easier time getting dates.
Look, I think you had multiple things that made you interesting as well.
So interesting you wanted to take my clothes off?
Wow. You know, when you put it that way, yeah. What happens if you marry the wrong one? Have you just ruined your entire life?
I would not have advised my mom to marry my dad.
Okay.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Let's Talk About It podcast by Moral Revolution. My name is Daniel Madry.
I'm Ellis Madry.
And we've got a fantastic episode lined up for you guys today. We're talking about an incredible topic. Babe, why don't you introduce the topic?
To be honest, the topic that we are going after today is one of the things that I see shipwrecking the dating lives of so many Christians.
Go on.
I mean, it truly will trip somebody up.
As one formerly tripped up by this very issue.
That's right. Daniel has his own experience with this.
I'm excited to introduce the topic today. Guys, we're talking about the one.
And is there just one person for everyone?
Fantastic question.
Okay. Well, babe, let me just volley that one to you. Does God have just one person for everyone?
Let me just volley it right back to you. No, I'm joking. I think my answer right out the gate is no. I don't think there is just one person for everyone. However, I did say this pre-game, and it struck a chord with the team. I think the higher your calling, the more limited your options.
That is such a loaded statement. You have to go into that.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, I think just like Sam was talking about earlier, he's like, hey, you're held to a higher standard if you're a teacher. You know, the Bible says that. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you're going to be a minister of the gospel, you've got to have a spouse that supports that. If you're going to be a missionary, which I think is one of the highest callings, mm-hmm. you're going to have a spouse that's in agreement for that. Mm-hmm. If you are willing to go to the hardest and darkest, you're going to have a spouse for that. If you want a normal job, if you want to live maybe a not as radical in terms of profession life, mm-hmm. then I think your options open up a little more.
Yeah.
If you want to be a nominal Christian, I think I use that word correctly, but you go to church on Sundays and Easter, on Easter and Christmas, then maybe you don't even have to marry a Christian. Maybe you just marry someone who's a good person.
Yeah, see, I would totally disagree with that statement.
I think that if you're probably a nominal Christian, you might not be saved, so I don't think it matters.
And that's where I think the differentiation is important, because someone who isn't saved is not a Christian, and someone who is saved, who is a Christian, should be married to someone who is equally yoked, like Scripture says. I do.
First off, you are right on that. If you are a believer, biblically speaking, you should be married to a believer.
And that's about all Scripture has to say on how to evaluate who it is that you're marrying.
Are they Christian?
Yeah, it says, don't be unequally yoked. Mm-hmm. Don't be unequally yoked. Mm-hmm. But we don't find the idea in Scripture that there would just be one person for everyone.
Right.
I do think it's worth saying that while there may not just be one person you could make it work with, there are for sure people who are wrong for you.
I absolutely agree with this. I was telling the team earlier, whenever I was in my dating season, I was so hype on this girl that I had been talking to, and I was like, it was one of those things where she was a good girl. I was a good girl. The Lord was like,
You were a good girl.
Did I say that?
You did.
Should we cut that?
No.
Someone's going to clip that.
No. No, they're not.
I cannot believe I said that.
She
but
was a
hindsight,
good girl.
I think I did say that.
You did.
She was a good girl. I was a good guy.
There you go.
I totally think it could have worked, which is why I think the Lord intervened. I was praying about it, and I was like, Lord, I mean, this could really go somewhere. And the Lord was like, she's not for you. And I was so sad, very disappointed. But it turns out the Lord had kind of been dropping those hints in her life as well. And I think it was just a really sovereign act of God by saying, hey, I love you both. You both love me. I think you guys would be better off with other people. Could I have probably forced that one through? Yeah, probably. Like, I mean, I don't think God's going to like twist my arm. But I definitely think that kind of informed my early decisions on, if the Lord said she's not for me, maybe that means there is one for me.
Would you say that mindset really tripped you up when you were dating?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say.
Yeah. So let me just ask this. Do you think that you could miss your person and ruin your entire life?
I think you can miss a good thing.
Okay, that's true.
I think you certainly can miss a great person for you.
If you think that there's only one and you're closed off until the Lord speaks and says, thus saith it's her.
Yeah, I think there's many reasons why you could miss a good thing, which biblical. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. I totally think that you can miss really good viable options. That's why I think it's dangerous to pigeonhole yourself into the idea that there's only one. Yeah, I mean it's a slippery slope. I've also been considering this lately, is that I really think the idea of one, like there's just one person for me, really is a poverty mindset.
Go into that.
The thing is, I grew up around a bunch of poverty mindset people who thought there's not enough.
Yeah.
There's never enough. And I think there being only one person for you fits into that narrative incredibly.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's the same conversation that wealth-minded people are thinking. And I don't mean wealth-minded in terms of you're born into the royals, you're a Kardashian, your net worth is more than $1 million. I think it's a mindset of, I trust and believe God for infinitely great things.
That he can provide anything I need.
God can do anything.
Yeah.
I can do anything. Me with God, we can do anything.
One of the issues I see with believing that there is just one person for everyone is what happens if you marry the wrong one? Have you just ruined your entire life?
Absolutely, you have. No, I think first off, that's a very good question. Number one, and I don't know if I'm spilling the beans too soon, but I think the right one is the one you choose.
That's exactly where I was going to go with it.
I spilled the beans. There it is.
There you go.
They don't even say that. Once again, a poverty saying.
Spill the beans.
I'm not going to get into that. But anyways, I think the fallacy with that argument is that if you think they're the one when you get married to them, and then you change your mind and you think they're not the one, number one, your motivation for working it out is diminished because you think I've married the wrong person. So it doesn't matter if I put in the work because these are the wrong ingredients. The second thing is that it really creates a trapped mentality of not only did I marry the wrong person, but I've now put a gigantic lid on top of my life. And it really piques a curiosity that you should not have when you're in the safety of marriage.
Yeah.
I think a very unhealthy mindset is thinking, what would my life look like with that person?
Oof,
Maybe they were the one. Guess what? The grass is always going to be greener on the other side. Wrong. The grass is green where you water it. You know what I do? I do the exact opposite. Anytime I see an unattractive trait in a girl, I'm like, man, I sure am glad I'm not married to that. You know what I mean? And it creates thankfulness because I start
For
to
me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I start to count my blessings of like, wow, Ellis and I really get along really well.
Yeah.
All of that to say, I didn't think Ellis was the one.
No,
I didn't have a word from God. I didn't have even necessarily a peace that surpasses understanding, though I wanted to. What did I have? I had wisdom. I had godly counsel. I had enough awareness to be like, wow, this could be a really good thing.
Yeah.
And because of those reasons, I chose my one. And I thank God every day that I did.
Yeah. When it comes to this idea of can you choose the wrong one? And our response being, well, the one is the one that you choose. That's absolutely true. But you also can choose someone who is more or less compatible for you.
Let's get into that. First off, can you choose the wrong one? Well, let me say this. You can definitely choose someone who's going to make life hard.
Yeah.
That is a reality. There are some people who are going to have a harder marriage solely based off the person they choose to marry.
Yeah.
So I think choosing who you're going to marry is one of the most important decisions you will ever make in your entire life.
Definitely.
On the flip side, I'll say this. On the record, I would not have advised my mom to marry my dad.
Okay.
If I was looking back, my dad did not go to church. I don't know if he would have considered himself a Christian.
Right.
He grew up in the South, so everyone was Christian, 50 years ago. I would not have advised my mom to marry my dad. However, they have a beautiful relationship now. They had 2 incredible kids. My dad is now a devout follower of Christ, but that's something you never could have predicted.
Right.
And who knows, maybe the reality is, although none of the ingredients were there, maybe my mom knew something, from the Lord. And maybe she didn't.
Maybe she didn't.
Maybe she just wanted to go to college, as family lore denotes.
Yeah. I mean, my parents had a very similar situation where my mom didn't know the Lord and my dad did, and he felt like he had a word from God that she was going to be saved. I wouldn't prescribe that.
It is not a prescription, but it's both of our parents' experience.
I think only by the grace of God. That's
exactly.
the thing. This is definitely not a take this Romans 8:28. God's gonna work it out. You don't know that. You know that God can work all things together for good. You do not know how it's gonna Scripture does clearly say believers should not marry unbelievers.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think, our parents are both examples of where we would say this did not clearly look like God was saying, thus, is the one for you. But by his grace, he did something great about it. And I think that that's the beautiful part of, the way the Lord works. But let me just ask this. Where did the idea or the concept of the one even come from?
I am so glad you asked, because I looked this up. I came prepared for this one.
Whenever I looked at the podcast notes, I said, what?
Yeah, so here's the deal. The earliest seeds of the one true love myth came from Plato's Symposium, 385 years before Christ.
So if I believe in the one, I might as well believe in Hercules and the boys.
Yeah, basically is what we're saying. Okay, so he basically tells a myth that humans were originally dual beings and they were split apart by the gods. And ever since, we've supposedly been searching for our, quote, other half. So this would be where the term soulmate comes from. It's literally the belief that there's someone else out there that completes you. Okay, so that's where it originated. It was perpetuated in the 18th and 19th centuries by just the romantic movement that took off in Europe, where writers and poets and artists.
I was about to say an artist.
And artists, for sure.
Have you seen all the naked people?
Yeah, no kidding. Emphasized passion, fate, emotional ecstasy, and love. And marriage became less about family alliances, which marriage was about family alliances culturally until the 18th century-ish, and more about finding your, quote, perfect match. And this paved the way for modern media to worship love as like someone's ultimate destiny.
Absolutely fascinating.
Isn't that crazy? And then you've got the obvious, like Hollywood and Disney took those themes and ran with it. But you even see evidence of this creeping in through Christian culture when you hear people say things like, God told me you're the one.
Let's talk about this real quick. I'm about to pull a curveball. I think we can all say this. Choosing the person you're going to spend your life with is the most important decision you will make outside of putting your trust in Christ.
Every time.
Outside of salvation, the one you choose to marry,
hopefully one time,
is the most important decision you will ever make. And the Bible is largely silent. It is not silent on Jesus. There is foreshadowing of Jesus from the first page, and then, and discussion of him on the last.
It's not silent on sex. The Bible's not silent on money. The Bible's not silent on, fill in the blank.
It's not silent on even the culture of relationships.
No. It is silent on how do you find the person you are supposed to marry.
If God's will was only for you to marry one person, you think that would have made the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
That was Jesus's conference message.
Right.
Like my man's gets up there on the mount and just starts going after everything.
Riffing.
And nowhere in the Sermon on the Mount did he say, and there is a one person you should marry, and you need to seek me until you find them. What's that? That little...
The triangle?
Yeah, the triangle.
Pyramid.
Show the triangle. Show them the triangle. Like you running for God, them running for God, and then you meet at the top. Listen, if that was true, I'm not going to say that's not true. You should totally pursue Christ and find someone else pursuing Christ. But there's a lot of people who pursue Christ who are very lonely.
Yeah.
And so one of the worst dating prescriptions or finding the one prescriptions would be to box yourself up, and spend time with the Lord. I think you should be doing that regardless. And I'm a huge proponent of daily quiet time. So don't hear what I'm not saying. But I think, part of finding the one is getting out there, becoming the one, and just getting after
and
it.
making wise decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we talk about what the Bible actually says about finding the one, which scripture never teaches that there's only one person, like you just laid out. It does talk about wisdom in choosing in Proverbs 18:22. It talks about character, mutual submission, and covenant in Ephesians 5. And it talks about freedom and responsibility in decision making in 1 Corinthians 7. But you are a powerful person who gets to, in partnership with God, make a wise decision about who it is that you're going to be spending your life with. And if you take nothing else away from this conversation, you've got to hear the one is the one that you choose.
For sure.
And even in moments when you're married and things get difficult and you start to question things, you need to know, I didn't just marry this person because I thought that they were the ethereal one for me. I married this person because I made a powerful decision to spend the rest of my life with that person. And so right now, when things are difficult, I can make a powerful decision to continue choosing that person.
That's good stuff, babe.
This statistic honestly blows my mind a little. 89.5% of the people who watch or listen to this podcast regularly aren't yet subscribers to the show. So before we dive in, could I ask you one thing? If this podcast has ever helped you, if you care about honest, unfiltered conversations around God's design for sex, dating, and relationships, would you hit subscribe? It's free and it helps us more than you know. And our promise to you is this: We'll do everything in our power to make this show the best it can be. We'll take your feedback, we'll keep answering your toughest questions, and there's no conversation around God's design for sex and relationships that we'll shy away from. Okay, let me throw a little lighter question out there. Do arranged marriages disprove the idea of a soulmate?
You know what? Comically, I think they do. I absolutely think that it could disprove the idea because, we live in an individualized Western culture where, we are curating this algorithm of exactly what I want. How tall is she? What color is her hair? Does she come from a family of money? How's her style? Can she cook? We start piecing together this just list that is very hard to obtain.
Yeah.
And then, we set our standards, and I don't want to say we should have high standards, but we set our standards so high, and then we're like, oh, God hasn't given us the one. Whereas, it's like, you're going to love it when AI comes through strong, because then that can make you the one.
Oh my gosh.
I'm joking, of course. But an arranged marriage, it's kind of like what you see is what you get. How do I make the best out of this?
Yeah.
And I think the mentality of I'm put into a marriage, which once again, this would not be Western culture, but I believe that there are many, many, many people who have been in arranged marriages who have found beauty in that marriage through simply, it's a mindset. It's a frame of mind. I honestly, I think that there's people who almost their ignorance makes them grateful. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, this is all we know. And of course, the one you're talking about, they would have come from a culture where it's like everyone gets arranged marriages. This is very normal. And
I would say that this question even is buying into Plato's philosophy. First of all, I think we have to stop imagining soulmates as this imaginary person who's floating around out there that's going to complete me. And if we're going to use the term soulmate, take it for what it literally says, which is someone your soul is mated to. And we talked about this on our last podcast, because your soul within marriage becomes tied to another person. Mm-hmm. Jesus's design, God's design for marriage, is that it would be a man and woman who are bonded together. They become one flesh. They are bonded together for life in marriage. That's your soulmate. It is the person that you enter into marriage with. It's not this person who's just like floating around out there waiting to be found, arranged marriage or not. Let me ask you this. Why do you think so many people who marry, quote, the one, still end up divorced?
I think the number one reason why people who marry the one get divorced is because of selfishness. I think that a successful marriage is made up of two people who have laid down their lives for one another. And you will see the biggest breakdown in marriage whenever I'm no longer looking out for you, but I'm now looking out for me. And so whether it's arranged, whether it's you're the one and I always thought you were, or whether I've never even heard of the one philosophy, we met at a bar and I thought you were hot, all of those will break down when selfishness is at the centerpiece of how a person operates within marriage.
So in that case, when someone says, God told me you're the one, is that just Christian manipulation?
Now, I'm not going to say that God couldn't say that, because I think I would be wrong.
Right.
I think that God certainly has spoken to people and brought specific people together. Why for some and not for others? Fantastic question.
Right.
I would love to know the answer for that. Everyone listening to this podcast knows that it would be easier if God inserted his voice and said, okay, Daniel, you're going to be with Ellis. Ellis, you're going to be with Daniel. Boom. You know what I mean? But the reality is that's not how it works.
I think it can be manipulation, but it's not always. And I think sometimes people think they hear the Lord and they don't. Sometimes they do hear the Lord and they spoke prematurely out of immaturity.
Yeah. People love to think that their emotions are the voice of God. And that is not true. Although I still think it stands. You know, the Lord probably does speak to some people.
I think God absolutely can and sometimes does tell people who they're going to marry. I think he probably more often tells people when they're in the wrong relationship. God knows how to get your attention with a no. We like to ignore him when we want what we want, but God knows how to get our attention with a no. You told a story at the beginning of the podcast where God got your attention with a no.
Can I tell you another incredible story?
I wish you would.
There is a pastor in my life who I'm a little sus on where he is theologically. Like, I actually don't know. He wouldn't align with me theologically, but I still love him. And I asked him, I said, what's the loudest thing you ever felt like you heard the Lord say to you? And I love asking people that question because it typically brings people back to a moment where the Lord really intercepted them. And he's like, well, me and my now wife were broken up, and I was absolutely trashed. Not trashed like he was drunk, like trashed like devastated. My guy was in the dumps, the bottom of the barrel, the pit. And he's like, and I was walking around my neighborhood one night, and it was, January, February. I was walking around my neighborhood, absolutely just heartbroken that I wasn't with, my wife anymore, who was his girlfriend at the time, who was his ex-girlfriend in this moment. And he's like, and I look up at this light pole, and he's like, and I hear the Lord say to me, you're going to marry her name. You're going to marry her before the end of the year. He's like, and we got married 3 days before the end of the year, that year. And I'm like, that's incredible.
You have such a way of bringing up stories and examples that are exceptions to the rule and not the rule.
You know what? I like to live a life of exceptions.
You really do. Like, you really like to lay out a concept and then say, now let me give you an example that goes exactly against this concept.
Here's the prescription. Go walk around your neighborhood tonight and look at every light pole you can.
No. That's not the prescription. But I think it is important in saying it doesn't always work one way. It's not always the same way. And every now and then there are exceptions to the rule. Usually, though,
I like the good stories, babe.
Usually you are the rule and not the exception.
I was the rule.
You were the rule.
Absolutely.
Yes, you were the rule.
I did not have a word from God, although I really wanted one.
Yeah. Let me say this. If God isn't out here thus saying our spouses, and we actually have a role to play in choosing the person who's the one for us, how do you go about making that decision?
Yeah, you use wisdom.
Because you were the rule. You had to make a decision
yeah.
that was not on a word from the Lord. And yet here we are in a marriage that both of us love and are grateful for.
Number one, shared mission.
Yeah.
Are we going in the same direction? Are we valuing the same things? Do we share high values in our spirituality, in our health, in our careers, or, us being ministry minded? That was important. That
we had similar callings.
Yeah. That our callings. The other thing is, I think, character. My personal take on this is, you want to marry someone with high character, someone who really follows through on their commitments, someone who has a track record of honesty, someone who, they don't have to be faultless. Like, people make mistakes. People have marks in their past. But I think, do they have a proven track record of showing up and being authentic and being themselves, the biggest red flag I would look out for is anyone who lies. Sorry. If they lie, the foundation is just a little cracked. Another thing that I would look out for is wise counsel in peace. I think typically if the loudest voices around you who you know, love, and trust are championing this relationship, then there is a good chance that it is good. Now, of course, they're not getting married. You are.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if everyone in the world thinks it's a good idea. If you don't think it's a good idea, then don't go for it.
Right.
And really, there is something to say about the peace of God. I think, outside of these electric emotions that can be misconstrued as peace, is this going to be someone who I can work through conflict with? Is this going to be someone I can do family vacation with? Is this going to be someone I can raise kids with? All of those things.
Consider those things.
I
saw this clip that I want to get your take on. It's Steve Harvey. You know what? Let's just roll it. Let's roll it, and I want to see what you have to say.
Okay, ladies, I'm going to let you in on a male secret. Something you've never heard before. We're not going to tell you this, but we know in 6 months is you the one. We ain't got nothing else for you. If you have what we want to offer, in 6 months, we know. And then we ain't going nowhere.
True or false?
I think true.
You do? 6 months?
Yeah, I think 6 months is pretty accurate.
Okay.
I mean, Steve said it best. It oftentimes confuses me. And now listen, caveat, there are reasons to date longer.
Yes.
But I think the principle of, could you know if this is the one? If this could be the one, I think the answer is yes. Oftentimes there are other things that we've got to work out and work through. Finances, family, different things that come up along the way. College, there's so many things. But yeah, I do think largely you can have a great idea at 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we just go back to the one isn't found, the one is chosen.
Right.
We're talking about, a 6-month time period, and that may be the rule and there could be exceptions. But ultimately, someone is choosing someone else. And that has to happen with wisdom, with peace, with a daily commitment to say, you know what? I'm going to show up today and I'm going to be in this relationship and I'm going to keep taking steps forward until I have a huge reason from the Lord, from wise counsel in my life, no matter the circumstance otherwise. That said, how do you know if you're choosing the one out of wisdom or if you're choosing the one out of fear of being alone?
Well, I think regardless of multiple motivations, you do need to choose out of wisdom. However, I do think there is something to say about the fear of being alone, because you'll get to a certain point and realize that if I don't make a decision out of wisdom, that I am going to be alone.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you value being married, then at some point you have to let wisdom lead you into a relationship or you will be alone.
Yeah.
Now, I don't see any scenarios where a rational person is saying, I'm just going to marry this person because I'm alone. You know what I mean? Let me tell you, that's a terrible reason.
An absolute recipe for disaster.
You're talking about, if you're alone, get a roommate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Get a roommate. If you're alone, stop working remote. Go into an office scenario. Volunteer with a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Join a sports team. You can pack out every minute of your day except for the time that you're sleeping if you're alone. And now it doesn't mean that the sting of not being married is any less, real. But I do think there can be some godly fear that helps push you forward.
And, I think it's important to say you're coming from the perspective of you were 33, you were taking inventory of your life, and you're realizing I'm alone because of my own doing.
Yeah.
Like, I let fear hold me back. I think that there's a female perspective in this equation.
Yeah, like
that needs
settling.
Sure, like settling.
Okay.
But that's not where I was going. But it needs to be represented of like there are women listening who would go, if an option came my way, like my standards are not that high. Mm-hmm. I'm not just waiting for Prince Charming to sweep me off my feet. It literally just hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And in that scenario, you are genuinely waiting on the timing of the Lord. You can take every step, there would be to make yourself available and around people and, and meeting people of the opposite sex and all of those things. And some people are in the situation genuinely because it has not happened yet and they don't have control over it. And then there are other people in a scenario that you're talking about where you're like, oh no, you actually need to take a step forward.
Right. That's a good point, because I was thinking about it from a one-track mind. Yeah, you don't want to compromise on who you're going to marry. So fear of being alone, that would be I do have immense empathy for anyone who's like, literally, I'm not that hard to please. You know what I mean? I'm a good person. I like good people.
I love Jesus.
Yeah, I love Jesus. Just
Yeah.
looking for someone who loves God.
Yeah.
I think that if I was in that situation, rather than letting fear motivate me into maybe compromising, I would let it motivate me into saying, how can I do two things? Number one, invest more into the Lord, and then number two, invest more into myself. How can I, Andy Stanley says in his book, The New Rules of Love, Sex, and Dating, he said, rather than trying to find the one, are you preoccupied in becoming the one?
Right.
And so I think there is something to say about becoming the one. Am I making myself dateable? Am I in counseling? Am I at the gym? Have I taken cooking classes? Am I reading up on things that would make me interesting in conversation? Like, these sound superficial, but these are the real laws of attraction. You know what I mean? Interesting people have an easier time getting dates. Well, how do I be interesting? I don't know. I mean, that was a struggle for me because I was pretty much just interested in the Lord. And so I had to find some other things. I'm just now learning how to talk about sports. Whenever a guy comes up to me and Ellis and starts talking about sports, I just kind of nudge Ellis and she'll be like, yeah, well, Bill Belichick and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like,
Bill Belichick's making news these days.
Well, and I do know a little bit about Bill, but there's a lot of the other Bill.
Yeah.
There's some.
The other Bill.
But there's some. But you are really good at talking about sports.
Yeah.
You can kind of get into multiple sports. You can talk coach, player, strategy, all of these. You're talking about the draft.
Look, I was trying to be interesting.
You were.
When I was single, I was like, I better know how to talk about sports. Look, I think you had multiple things that made you interesting as well, which is why we ended up sitting here today, is because I found you interesting. And
so interesting you wanted to take my clothes off?
Wow. When you put it that way, yeah.
I feel known. Seen and known.
I'm like terrified that that's going to be kept in the podcast. Let's move along. And let me just ask you this. What happens when someone else marries the person that you thought was going to be your person?
Well, they are no longer your person.
And maybe they weren't ever.
We do know someone. Before Ellis and I were dating, someone came up to me and they were like, so I think the Lord told me who I'm going to marry. And I'm like, oh, let's go in.
Nice of God to tell you. I wish he'd tell me.
Yeah, exactly. And he says, Ellis. And I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking many things.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm kind of interested in Ellis. I think Ellis is interested in me. I think even if that wasn't on the table, there's a good chance that just, if I'm just evaluating very neutrally, I don't think it would be a good fit. Wow.
But God told him.
But God told him.
Yeah.
And he held on to that. And after you and I got married, I had heard from, a mutual friend that he was still like holding on to the idea that y'all were going to get married. And I was kind of like, well, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because, the violent take it by force.
Oh, no. What's he think? You're going to die?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what he's thinking, but he's literally caught up in this idea. We've been married a few years now.
Yeah.
But I think at least 2 years after we were married, it was still a thing. And that's enough. You need to let the dream die.
The thing is that could really shipwreck a person.
And I think it did. It challenged part of his life.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's a very scary place to find yourself in. But if I was him, and even if I believed it was truly the Lord and you just missed it and settled for me, I would.
Then at least you got to take Romans 8:28 for what it says, that all things work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to his purpose.
Yeah, I would let that ship sail.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If someone gets married, I'm not giving you a second thought for the rest of my life.
Right.
Even if I thought the Lord had spoken that into existence.
Because that would be a violation of something that the Lord brought together.
Yeah.
Because what Jesus said about marriage is what the Lord has brought together, let no man separate. And so to be dwelling on someone else who's already married is to be violating what God has ordained.
Right.
So as we move into the close of this podcast, I think one of the things that keeps people in this cycle of looking for the one is they're looking for perfection. They're looking for someone who was made for them. It's like, oh, God tailor-made you for me. And now we're starting to dismantle it and say, okay, actually, the one is the one that you choose. You are a powerful person who makes a powerful decision about who it is you're going to marry. In fact, God gave us free will from the beginning. God has always been one who's given us a choice. He gives us a choice about whether or not to be in relationship with him. We have to assume he's going to give us a choice about whether or not to be in relationship with our spouse.
Right.
Right. So if we have this choice of who we're going to marry, what are some ways that someone can shift from chasing that perfect image or looking for the one to just start building healthy relationships right now?
Yeah, I think the first mindset shift that you need to have is understanding that, wait a second, there's a lot of people out there that I could marry. There's a lot of good people out there, and I'm going to find one. I think even having the mentality that you are worth it, that you have what it takes, and that there's a lot of people will start to kind of give you a leg up. I think another thing is, if you lived in a tribe of 100 people and you only thought those 100 people existed, you would be happy with much less. You know what I mean? But because of social media, because of globalization, because of, the way the world is structured now.
Dating apps that you can endlessly swipe through.
Yeah. Dating apps. I think even just the curation on social media. Because honestly, I feel like some of the people who are best at social media are worse at relationships. You know what I mean?
That's a future podcast for a future day.
Well, because I think that I've got to be good at manipulating and touching up and all of this stuff.
I think you just offended a whole bunch of girlies who are really good at Instagram.
Keep trying, girlies. Because the guys don't know any better. But I do think that there is something to say about focusing on what you like about someone rather than what they lack. So, rather than looking for perfection, looking for, how do you say, compatibility.
Yeah. Lead with curiosity.
Right.
And look for compatibility.
Right.
Instead of saying, are they perfect for me, trying to understand, how do they see the world? Is it a way that I also see the world? Could our worldviews align? Do our beliefs align? Do our values align? I think if you're praying about it, you can shift from saying, God, would you send me the person that's for me, to, God, would you help me see people the way you do? I want to be married. I want to be in a deeply fulfilling, healthy relationship. Help me to see people like you see them.
For sure. So, we hope that this was helpful, a conversation around the one, and maybe you've always believed that there was only one for you and you had a 1 in 8 billion chance in finding that person. Hopefully they reside in the country that you do. But, we want you to be able to open up your minds and realize that God has a beautiful way of bringing people together, and that there's really so much growth that can happen through being curious in relationships, and being grateful for what the gifts and talents or attributes that people possess. And so, we want to end with, don't get caught up in who was it? Plato Symposium.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't get caught up in Plato Symposium.
That's right.
The idea that there's only one, that your soul is roaming to and fro through the earth looking for this person, but know that there's a lot of incredible people that you could marry and have a great life with. And if you're pursuing God, you're pursuing health in yourself, and you're putting yourself out there, being open, we believe that you're going to find the one right for you.
Yep. All right, guys. The one. It's the one you choose. We'll see you next time. We do this show for one reason: to equip you to walk in wholeness and freedom. We're not here to preach at you. We're here to meet you where you are, to ask hard questions, have awkward conversations, and pursue God's design for sex and relationships together. So if there's something that you're wrestling with, a topic that you want us to tackle, or a question that you've been afraid to ask, leave a comment and let us know. This isn't just our show, it's yours too.